She fluttered her eyes open, tuning into her surroundings. She found herself still surrounded by tranquil darkness. She reached out her arms in a pleasurable stretch, then fell limp afterwards. She stared at the plain fabric of her comforter, not completely feeling awake. As her brain buffered back into wakefulness, she continued to lay unmoving and stared. Light slowly began to be found on the other side of her comforter, and her eyes slightly widened. She pushed herself up into a sit, the covers falling off her and pooling around her body. Her curtains were slightly pulled at either side, a small line of light shining in like a ray splitting the thick and previously imposing blackness. She stared at the unfamiliar sight silently, neither getting up to shut the blinds completely, as she did earlier, she was certain, or to lay back down again. She didn't know how much time she ended up losing just caught up in a trance, but the sound of pattering on her floorboards drew her back to her present moment. When she looked, Zarina was exiting from her abyssal closet once again. "You're back," Tristan hummed quietly, her tone placid, but that was due to her still waking up. Zarina stopped and stared back at her equally calm, her long fluffy tail being the only thing moving as it flicked behind her slightly. "Well, I guess it's time to go," she droned again, then sluggishly pushed herself up to her feet. Zarina cocked her head in initial confusion, but ended up getting her answer anyway. Tristan had been planning on venturing to the magic shop in the city for basically ages, ever since she got money. She'd been meaning to seek out several things to make sure her brother was safe when she wasn't around, and also to explore the realms of what she was exactly capable of. From the most she had researched, she was an empath, and was eager to learn more about it. She retrieved her cloak from the closet, and prepared to tie it on, but paused and looked at Zarina, who was looking off to the side a little ways away from her. Upon the attention, the animal turned and met eyes with her again, cocking her small head in confusion. Tristan thought for a moment. She couldn't just leave the cat in her room and risk either of her family seeing her. She loved her little brother dearly, but even she couldn't allow him to see her. What to do? Suddenly, she got an idea and started sifting through her closet for her object of interest. She soon ended up identifying it among other piles of clothes and fabrics from her childhood box, and tugged it out from the very bottom. She unearthed a long and relatively large old gray ribbon, and looked at it with resigned pleasure upon achieving her goal. Zarina squinted her eyes at Tristan, round ears slightly turning back at the sight of the ribbon. She knew what Tristan was going for. "Come on, don't look at me that way. This is just for assurance. It's like putting a collar on a lost pet, just to avoid people thinking you're astray." Zarina looked even more irritated at this, but Tristan pushed past the thought and crouched down in front of the animal. Zarina didn't run away like she expected, but she still leaned away from Tristan's hands with her ears flattened to her head. With little issue, however, she was able to tie the ribbon around Zarina's neck and make a bow from it. "There, much better." Zarina leered up at her, more than likely disagreeing, but she didn't attempt to get it off. "All right, let's head off then." Her black robe fluttered up as she turned and made her way to her door. Zarina trotted right after her silently. Tristan barely able to hear the small paw steps, but trusted her presence was still there. She paused when she found her brother's room door open with the lights off. He wasn't there. The train track mat in the middle of the room next to his red sports car bed. He must have gone to sleep over at a friend's house. She wanted to know which friend he'd gone to eagerly, because there was some whose family was very questionable. She had her train of thoughts interrupted when she felt something bump her leg. Then, upon looking down, she found Zarina staring up at her again. Realizing what she was most likely thinking, she mouthed a quiet apology and turned her face away from her brother's room, and began to descend down the stairs finally. Upon reaching the floor, she paused when she noticed the family room was lit up by the light of the TV, and was filled with the sound of a cop show her father mainly enjoyed. And at the smell of cigarette smoke wafting in the air, she knew he was still in there. She considered just walking by as silently as she could to not catch his attention, but told herself that even if he did see her, she wasn't going to be blamed for whatever would come after that. And just as she took one step forward, she felt her cloak get firmly tugged back. She turned and saw Zarina again. The end of her dark cloak clamped between her small jaws, and her paws planted stiffly to the floor. At this, Tristan felt her heated indignation calm and subside. She couldn't go picking fights like this, especially knowing how her father could get. She then suddenly got an image of the kitchen where her sliding door was. She could certainly go out of the house from that side. She frisked for her shoes and began making her way to the kitchen. She expected it to be empty, but was irritated when she found her mother at the table with the drink in front of her, her head down into her crossed arms. Tristan narrowed her eyes coldly at the woman, before tearing her eyes away and focused solely on her exit. She knew her mother had severe allergies to animals, and became concerned over Zarina, inducing her into a sneezing mess, but was pleasantly surprised when no such reaction occurred, which set the point of Zarina not being an actual animal even more. Without much trouble, she cleared the kitchen, passing her mother, who didn't even stir upon her presence, and made it to the sliding door. She slipped her shoes on and slid open the door, but slightly looked over her shoulder at the woman at the table. One would have assumed on first appearances that she was more than likely passed out. Tristan didn't know why or how, but she knew she was still awake and probably preferring to ignore her presence in the hope of a moment of peace before her father's wrath would inevitably continue. She sneered in disgust, before turning around and leaving the home without looking back. Zarina hung back for a moment, casting a saddened glance at the worn and exhausted woman. Glimpses of times of sunshine getting buried under the rubble of her fractured psyche. Zarina's ears swiveled back in anguish, but forced herself to turn away. She immediately pushed away the flash of emotion she rarely felt so often and narrowed her eyes sharper. She phased through the glass door and bounded after the narrow-minded girl, and into the cold, unforgiving darkness.